The man who had more power than JFK in 1963. At 2:30 p.m. on the afternoon of November 19, 1963, President John F. Kennedy sat in the Oval Office holding a document that would challenge the most powerful unelected official in American history. The document was a presidential directive addressed to Allen Dulles' successor at the CIA. It wasn't a request, it wasn't a suggestion, it was an order to fundamentally restructure how American intelligence operated. The subject was covert operations, specifically the CIA's autonomous power to conduct secret wars without meaningful presidential oversight. Kennedy demanded accountability. He demanded transparency. He demanded that the Central Intelligence Agency answer to the Commander-in-Chief, not operate as an independent government within the government. The directive stated that all major covert operations required explicit presidential approval and that the CIA would be stripped of its paramilitary capabilities. Kennedy prepared to sign the order and send it to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. 3 days later, Kennedy was dead. In the aftermath, former CIA Director Allen Dulles, the central figure behind the agency Kennedy had spent 2 years trying to reform, would later be appointed to the commission investigating Kennedy's assassination. To many historians, this moment illustrates a striking paradox of American power. The president who sought to rein in the intelligence community was gone, while the institutional system he challenged remained intact. If you want to understand how one unelected intelligence chief wielded more real power than the President of the United States, and how that power endured beyond administrations, please hit that like button. It helps us share more historically grounded stories like this. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Kennedy and Allen Dulles. The story begins not in 1963, but on December 19, 1960, 6 weeks after Kennedy won the presidency. Kennedy requested a meeting with outgoing President Dwight Eisenhower to discuss the transition. During that meeting, Eisenhower delivered a warning that Kennedy would later reflect on deeply. Eisenhower cautioned Kennedy about the growing influence of the military-industrial complex and the intelligence establishment that had expanded far beyond its original mandate. Eisenhower described Allen Dulles as brilliant and dedicated, but warned that the intelligence system had become so powerful that even presidents could struggle to control it. Kennedy had the Soviet threat to worry about: Cuba, Berlin, Vietnam, Laos. But from his first days in office, Allen Dulles represented a different kind of challenge. Dulles wasn't an adversary. He was supposed to be Kennedy's subordinate. But Dulles didn't see presidents that way. Dulles saw presidents as temporary stewards. He saw himself as a permanent guardian of American security, someone who understood threats presidents couldn't fully grasp and who made decisions politicians were reluctant to make. Allen Dulles had been running covert operations since World War II. He worked for the Office of Strategic Services, the CIA's predecessor. He oversaw the 1953 coup in Iran that removed Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. He engineered the 1954 coup in Guatemala that overthrew President Jacobo Arbenz. He supervised operations across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Europe. By 1961, when Kennedy took office, Dulles had shaped American intelligence for nearly 2 decades. He knew every secret. He controlled vast intelligence networks. He maintained relations with foreign intelligence agencies, journalists, academics, and policymakers that extended beyond any single administration. Kennedy was 43 years old. Dulles was 68. Kennedy had 8 years in the Senate. Dulles had decades in intelligence. Kennedy believed he could assert control over the CIA. Dulles believed the institution itself was the authority. Within days of Kennedy's inauguration, Dulles briefed the new president on ongoing covert operations, including a CIA-planned invasion of Cuba using Cuban exiles. The plan had been initiated under Eisenhower. Dulles assured Kennedy it would succeed. He claimed it would spark a popular uprising against Fidel Castro, and that American involvement would remain plausibly deniable. Kennedy had doubts. His advisors had doubts, but Dulles was confident. He was the expert. He had removed governments before, and he warned that canceling the operation would signal weakness. Kennedy approved the plan, with restrictions. He denied full air support. He limited U.S. involvement. Dulles accepted these conditions, or appeared to. On April 17, 1961, 1,400 CIA-trained exiles landed at the Bay of Pigs. Within 3 days, the operation collapsed. The invasion was exposed. Kennedy accepted responsibility. From the perspective of later historians, the failure revealed something deeper. While the invasion collapsed, the institutional assumptions behind it remained intact. Several scholars argue the operation was structured in a way that assumed presidential escalation once events were underway, reflecting a broader intelligence culture that believed its strategic judgment would ultimately prevail. Kennedy refused to escalate. He chose humiliation over war. But he learned a crucial lesson. The intelligence he received had been filtered, shaped, and framed to secure approval rather than present objective risk. According to Kennedy's own statements to advisors, he concluded that the CIA's autonomy posed a serious problem. He famously remarked that he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. But removing Dulles was not simple. Dulles had allies across government. He had bipartisan relationships in Congress. He had supporters in media and academia. And he possessed institutional knowledge that made confrontation dangerous. So Kennedy waited. On November 29, 1961, Kennedy accepted Allen Dulles's resignation. It was presented publicly as a graceful retirement. In reality, it marked the end of Dulles's official tenure, though not his influence. According to multiple biographers, Dulles viewed his dismissal as a profound institutional defeat. Kennedy appointed John McCone as CIA director, an outsider chosen precisely because he was not part of the agency's internal culture. But the CIA Dulles built remained. Many senior officers had spent years working under Dulles and were deeply shaped by the institutional worldview he created, one that often viewed presidential oversight as a temporary political constraint rather than permanent authority. Throughout 1962 and 1963, Kennedy tried to assert control. He issued national security action memoranda requiring presidential approval for operations. He transferred paramilitary authority to the Department of Defense. He reduced budgets. He challenged intelligence assessments. And Allen Dulles watched from outside government. According to historical accounts, Dulles remained unusually well informed about internal debates within the national security establishment, reflecting the influence he retained even after leaving office. By late 1963, Kennedy had concluded that incremental reform was insufficient. He planned a structural overhaul. On November 19, 1963, Kennedy drafted a directive that would have stripped the CIA of covert action authority and reduced it to intelligence collection and analysis. 3 days later, he was assassinated. Lyndon Johnson became president and appointed a commission to investigate the murder. Among its members was Allen Dulles. While this does not imply wrongdoing, historians continue to debate whether Dulles's inclusion represented a serious conflict of interest, given his history with Kennedy's intelligence reforms. Multiple scholars have noted that Dulles played an influential role within the commission, particularly in shaping how intelligence matters were examined. The commission did not investigate Kennedy's conflict with the CIA in depth. The reforms Kennedy planned were never enacted. The intelligence structure he sought to dismantle endured. After Kennedy's death, his intelligence reforms were abandoned. CIA operations expanded. Here's Helms, a Dulles protege, became director in 1966. The system Dulles built survived. So who had more power in 1963? Kennedy had constitutional authority. Dulles had institutional power. Real power was not the ability to issue orders, but the ability to outlast administrations, control information, and resist reform. Kennedy recognized this too late. The lesson isn't about conspiracy, it's about structure, about how entrenched institutions can eclipse elected authority. In 1963, the man Kennedy fired held more enduring power than the president who fired him, and that legacy still shapes the modern intelligence skate today. If this story changed how you think about presidential power, hit like, subscribe, and join Unfinished History, where we explore contested and often overlooked chapters of the past. History doesn't repeat, but it echoes.